It is now my extreme pleasure and great honor to introduce the reasons for our celebration tonight, the 2021 Gold Medal Honorees. As we said when we announced the honorees earlier this year we honor 3 accomplished scholars who have not only made extraordinary contributions to their own academic disciplines, but also contributed to and shaped broader cultural conversations about history, justice, and equity that have resonated far beyond the academy. They are each in their own way masterful communicators who have helped us better understand our place in history and our obligations to each other. Honorees, as I introduce you, please come up on stage and take a seat for our panel conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please save your applause until after all of them have taken their seats. Thank you. Amartya Sen is an Indian economist and philosopher who has made contributions to welfare economics, social choice theory, economic and social justice, economic theories of famines, decision theory, development economics, public health, and measures of well-being of countries. He is currently Thomas W. Lamont University Professor and Professor of Economics and Philosophy at Harvard University. Until 2004, he was the Master of Trinity College, Cambridge. He has served as the President of the Econometric Society, the American Economic Association, the Indian Economic Association, and the International Economic Association. His books have been translated into more than 40 languages. Amartya Sen's awards include Bharat Ratna from India, Commandeur de la Légion d'honneur from France, the National Humanities Medal from the United States, Ordem do Mérito Científico from Brazil, Honorary Companion of Honor from the UK, Aztec Eagle from Mexico, the Edinburgh Medal, the George Marshall Award, the Eisenhower Medal, and, last but not least, the Nobel Prize in Economics. Amartya Sen. While he's making his way up, I'll keep going. Kwame Anthony Appiah is a British Ghanaian philosopher, cultural theorist, and novelist whose interests include political and moral theory, the philosophy of language and mind, and African intellectual history. He teaches philosophy at New York University in the College of Arts and Sciences and in the law school. Earlier, he taught at Princeton, Harvard, Duke, Cornell, Yale, Cambridge, and the University of Ghana. He grew up in Ghana and was educated at Cambridge, where he took undergraduate and doctoral degrees in philosophy. He has written widely in philosophy of mind and language, ethics and political philosophy, and the philosophy of art, of culture, and of the social sciences, as well as in literary studies, where his focus has been on African and African-American literature. In February 2012, President Obama presented him with the National Humanities Medal. In 1992, he published the prize-winning In My Father's House, Africa in the Philosophy of Culture. His recent publications include Cosmopolitanism, Ethics in a World of Strangers, and Lines of Descent, W.E.B. Du Bois and the Emergence of Identity, and The Lies That Bind, Rethinking Identity. Anthony Appiah. Finally, we have Henry Louis Gates, Jr. He is an American literary critic, professor, historian, filmmaker, and public intellectual who serves as the Alphonse Fletcher University Professor and Director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. Emmy and Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, journalist, cultural critic, and institution builder, Professor Gates's most recent books are Stony the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow, and The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song. He has also produced and hosted more than 20 documentary films, most recently The Black Church on PBS and Black Art in the Absence of Light for HBO. Finding Your Roots, his groundbreaking genealogy and genetics series, is now in its 7th season on PBS. He is a recipient of a number of honorary degrees, most recently a Lit D from his alma mater, the University of Cambridge. Gates was a member of the first class awarded Genius Grants by the MacArthur Foundation in 1981, and in 1998, he became the first African-American scholar to be awarded the National Humanities Medal. A native of Piedmont, West Virginia, Gates earned his BA in history summa cum laude from Yale University in 1973 and his MA and PhD in English literature from Clare College at Cambridge in 1979, where he is also an honorary fellow. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our 2021 honorees a hearty welcome and a big round of applause.
They're going to get mine from my back.
We need those, yes. Nope, I got them. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
There we go. Pardon me.
Got it?
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are welcome.
Beautiful. Good to see you, man.
Well, I don't know about you, but I feel a little overmatched up here. Nevertheless, I'm the guy wearing the flowery waistcoat, so I get to ask the first question. That's the rule I just made up. Professor Sen, I think I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us what set you on the path to becoming who you are today? How has your personal history directed your professional career?
Oh my God.
I deliver the softballs first.
Why don't I think about the answer while I listen to them?
Okay.
This is why he got the Nobel Prize.
Anthony, I think that
Okay.
leaves it to you.
Same question.
Same question.
Okay. True answer, I was an evangelical Christian high school student in England in a boarding school. And I was trying to make sense of my religious faith with a group of friends. And we started reading theology. And to read theology, in the end, you get led to philosophy because all the interesting theology is connected with philosophy. And I found myself reading texts that I was not prepared to read. I started reading Kant's First Critique when I was 16, which I don't recommend at any age to do on your own. And then I discovered in the book room of the school I was at a copy of Alfred Ayer's Language, Truth, and Logic. And it cut through so much of the difficulty and sort of puzzlement that I had. And it was a kind of liberation. And so that's how it got started. It got started because in the way I think that philosophy gets started in a lot of people's lives, which is that you start thinking about how you're going to live your life, and it turns out that all these very serious people have invested a lot of brains and heart in giving you ideas about how to do that. So that's the short version.
Henry?
I was raised to be a medical doctor. For my mother.
Me too.
Yeah, and when I met Anthony, he was
I was a medical student
when we met. And we were students together at Cambridge. You know, we've been friends. In 2 years, it will be our 50th anniversary of friendship. And he's my daughter's godfather, and I was a witness at his wedding, and he's my best.
The only witness.
Best friend. I was the only.
It was a very private event.
Yeah, and I dropped that around all these other friends, too. Sorry, I didn't see you at the wedding. But for my mother, God rest her soul, you know, in heaven there was a Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, and a medical doctor. All smart little black kids, all smart little kids when I was growing up. I was born in 1950. We were raised to be doctors. And if you couldn't get in med school, then you were going to be, go to law school. And so I got dissecting kits for birthday and a stethoscope for Christmas. And it was just the way it was going to be. And actually, on my SATs, my quantitative scores were 50 points higher than my qualitative scores. Now, I was a science. I'm very, it's one of the reasons I'm so glad that I'm able to do Finding Your Roots, because so much of the success of the show is dependent on genetics. I'm very comfortable with science. And it's given me a way to come back to my sort of science beginnings. But in the 8th grade, I had an English teacher named Helene Iverson. I grew up in a paper mill town, 2,500 people. An Irish-Italian paper mill town in the Allegheny Mountains on the Potomac River, halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington. Brown, Irish-Italians and a handful of black people. Brown v. Boards in 1954. Our schools integrated in 1955 without Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King, without one march, and I started school in 1956. So I went to the white school, as we called it, and I never suffered any discrimination. My brother was 5 years older. He's really brilliant. He's an oral surgeon. And so he paved the way, and I was, you know, they expected me to do well. And it was a meritocracy. You know, the rural, independent Appalachians. Anthony's been to my home area many times. So the teachers rewarded smart kids. And I did very well. My mother, we had cable TV came to this town in 1949. Cable TV was invented for places like Piedmont, West Virginia, because a signal couldn't get over the mountains. So all my friends and now my students think cable came to New York City first. It didn't. It came to rural areas like West Virginia. And my mother, who was a genius, and I watched Ding Dong School and Romper Room, all the predecessors to Sesame Street. And we made papier-mâché castles, and she taught me to read and write. And she told me that, like my brother, I was special, and that I was going to be a very famous medical doctor, right? So in the 8th grade, and this story is almost over, in the 8th grade, Helene Iverson, my English teacher, I would only write my book reports on sports books because my brother was a jock, my father loved sports. I was never meant to be a jock, but I could get close to them by learning intellectually about sport. So I only did book reports on sports books. And Mrs. Iverson said, she called me Lewis. She said, Lewis, you can no longer do any book report on sports. And I said, what am I supposed to do? She gave me a copy of A Tale of Two Cities. And I looked at it, I almost had a heart attack. Like as long as, I go, what am I supposed to do with that? She said, read it. And, you know, it was the best of times, the worst of times. From that, I was hooked. I stayed up all night reading that book all week till it was done, and then I read Les Miserables. And then I read The Agony and the Ecstasy. And as I've written before, it was the first time I realized that words could create erotic feelings. I was in the 8th grade. And there's a passage when Michelangelo visits his mistress one afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I read that page so many times it turned a different color than all the other in the book. And so that was the beginning, and I knew that it was, that I loved literature more than I would ever love being a doctor. But the end of this story is, it was at a dinner in October 1973 with one of the two other black students at Clare College, the University of Cambridge, Kwame Anthony Appiah, that's how it's properly pronounced at Ghana, and a man who would go on 13 years later to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, Wole Soyinka, from Nigeria, who was there in exile, just by happenstance. And I started studying African literature with Soyinka, and he took Anthony and me to an Indian food. It was the first Indian meal I ever had. And Soyinka is a real connoisseur of wine. So we were drinking wine, which I'd never drunk before. My generation at Yale used wine to fill hookahs with. we didn't drink it. And so we were drinking. Anthony, of course, a very sophisticated British. We were drinking wine. My mouth was on fire with all this hot chilies, and I was doing my best to keep up. And they both turned to me and they said, "We have brought you here to tell you, you are never going to be a medical doctor. that God put you on this earth to become a professor, an academic, and you are going to go back home and revolutionize the place of African and African American studies in the academy." And I cried. He is the reason that I am sitting here today, and I love him like my own dad.
Amartya, have you stored up enough of their anecdotes? Story?
I've been reflecting. I cannot match any of this. Didn't have a religious background. Don't remember a time when I had a bit of religiosity in me. I can't think of a time when everything seemed easy to do. In fact, it was an interesting life for me because I was traveling from childhood. I was born in Bengal, in a place called Shantiniketan, which is a university town which Rabindranath Tagore, the poet, had founded. My home was Dhaka, which is now the capital of Bangladesh. At the age of 3, my father accepted a visiting professorship in Mandalay in Burma, so we went off there. And I roamed around, and one of the interesting things that happened is that you try to figure out what they found interesting, and you can learn a bit from that. I was very interested in the Indian mathematics at that time as a young man, and I was interested to see that the Indian mathematics came to Europe only through the Arabs. If you think of a trigonometric term like sine, cosine, originally founded by an Indian mathematician called Aryabhat, who called it jiva, which means chord, half a chord, which is a way to represent it. The Arabs translated it from, instead of jia to jiva. Jiva had no meaning in Arabic, but Arabic, like Hebrew, had no vowels, so it was written as jiva. So the Arabs' later generation made into jave, which means a lake or a cove, a bay. And when in Gerardo, and they called that in later Arabic, and when Gerardo of Cremona translated that into Latin, he translated lake or a cove into the proximate Latin word, namely sinus, from which the word sine comes. So in one word you see the movement from one language to another, one tradition to another. I have to say of the writers in Arabic on Indian mathematics, the one I like most was one called Al-Biruni, who wrote in the 11th century. And among other things, he said that, I really like Indian mathematics a lot, but what I really like most is the ability of the Indian to speak eloquently on subjects on which they know absolutely nothing. And I could see that is indeed a major gift to cultivate. And gifts are so different kind. I mean, I even hear, now that I have the age of 88, and some, after some radiation treatment, lost mobility. It's interesting to see that in this present stage of disability, when you manage to make 3 steps, this is regarded as a major achievement. You don't have to climb the Everest or even the Darjeeling. All you have to do 3 steps, and people will say, oh yes, that's all done. It's wonderful, it's coming very well. And that's, again, one of the, I guess, pleasures of old age, that you succeed in doing that. So I think over the years, one thing that's been striking to me is how differently achievements come. And when I, after this novel stuff, when I went back to India, somebody from Dhaka in Bangladesh said that this is your country, so you have to come here first. And I went there first, and then the school I used to go to was called St. Gregory. The St. Gregory's headmaster, an American guy from San Francisco, he told me that in order to encourage the students, he has started not only a prize in my name, but he also fished out some exam papers of mine from very early days. And he was about to distribute it, except that he discovered that my positional standing in a class of 37 was 33rd. And he said that he wasn't absolutely certain how encouraging that might be for the student. I found it very encouraging. Yes. So I think it's the variety of life that has come my way, usually not chosen in a very intelligent way, but come my way nevertheless, has been extraordinary. And that includes great successes like my 2 co-honorees sitting here, and it's been a great fortune of mine to know them. And that is one of the genuine things I can say, that I may not be able to say, what have I done? But I could say, look at my friends and see what they have done. So with that, and with my thanks to my friends, and of course, thanks to Fred very much.
Anthony, I'm going to ask you another question, really elaborating, I think, on a theme that I'm picking up here, is that personal history is tied with history in the round. It's tied with bigger history. And you've all written about that from different perspectives, different angles, different scholarship, different studies, different means. And yet, it's clear, or it's clear to me anyway, it seems clear to me that the personal is almost central, or if not central, very, very important to the kind of way you think about history and society and so forth. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we were talking at our table earlier about the fact that the reason Skip and Paul Boghossian at our table know each other is because they were at the Rockefeller Foundation in Bellagio in Italy for some weeks together many years ago. But during those weeks, Skip wrote a book called Colored People, and most of us can't write a book in 6 weeks, but Skip can. and that's a book that I think of. There aren't many books in American letters that sort of tell the story of our country through a period by just talking about the experience of a particular town, a particular place, a particular set of people, and a particular very talented person. And I think that one of the things that I've learned over the course of a life as an academic philosopher is that people understand many abstract ideas, at least ideas about social and moral life, best through narrative, through stories in which you get them to see what the point is of, if you want to understand what the point is of equality, you can talk about it abstractly, or you can read Frederick Douglass's narratives. And you can see what inequality can do to a person, and also what rising above inequality can do, because the amazing thing, of course, about Douglass was that he was an enslaved person who became one of the most distinguished Americans of the 19th century. As you could say, very much against the odds. So I think that I've sort of increasingly felt that a lot of abstract ideas are communicated best through stories, and each of us, there's one set of stories that each of us knows best, which is our own story. So I've found it useful from time to time to take things from my own life, not because I think I'm especially interesting, but because these are stories I know that can be used to make general points about moral and political and ethical life that I think I've learned both by thinking about them abstractly, but also by being a human being living a life. And so I think there is a profound connection between, it's not just that our own individual experiences play into our theoretical understandings. Of course they do. It would be preposterous, it would be silly to deny that. But it's that you can actually take stories from your own life and use them to make general points. As, Plato did that by telling things about the life of Socrates. So, yeah, I think that sort of personal thing is, it's a tool of exposition, which Skip is brilliant at, and which I think is perhaps undervalued in my particular branch of the academy, but which I've found ways to use. And Marty's, some of Marty's writing is like this. It takes things in his life and deepens our understanding of them through storytelling. And I think that's the thing we three have in common.
To see the world in a grain of sand, right? The allegory. For me, I wrote Colored People as a love letter to my mother, who died in 1987. And I worshiped my mother. I'm very close to my father as well. I had a very wonderful household. My older brother's an oral surgeon, and me, there were just two kids. My father worked 2 jobs in the paper mill in the daytime and was a janitor at the telephone company in the evening. And because of that, poverty and wealth are relative, right? Because of that, we were the wealthiest black family in Piedmont, West Virginia. I always had my own bedroom, and I had my own desk in my bedroom and a bookshelf, and Reader's Digest condensed books came every month. My father subscribed to Alfred Hitchcock magazine, and I was expected to do well, and I was rewarded for doing well in this integrated school, though there are only, as I said, a handful of black people. No stories like Richard Wright, but a librarian not letting me take books out of the library. Just the opposite. Everybody was proud of me. And they made me feel special, but nobody made me feel more special than my mother, who told me and my brother every day of our lives that we were beautiful and that we were brilliant. She was lying, but you become hypnotized if somebody actually, you look at her and you go, am I really beautiful? Brenda Kimball didn't think I was beautiful. And so then my mother died, and I have 2 little girls, one born in 1980, one born in 1982. So Mama died in 1987. And one day, I was talking about how beautiful my mother was, and my older daughter said, she didn't look beautiful to me. And she was just a little kid. She didn't mean it in a mean way. And I realized that they didn't know who my mother was. And my mother was sick. We had an autopsy performed when she died. We thought that she had early stage Alzheimer's, but she had hardening of the arteries. And so she wasn't the same vivacious. She went through a very severe menopause when I was 12 years old. And she was never the same after that. It sounds like something simple, but it wasn't. It was and the science in 1962, medical science was primitive. People thought she was a hypochondriac. She was never the same. And so I went to Bellagio, where I met Paul, and we played ping pong together every afternoon, and Boule in the evening. And when I was walking up to the Veduta, everyone had their own study. It had a name. The Veduta means the view. I looked across Lago di Como, and I saw a man hauling a fishing boat. And it reminded me of a day my Uncle Jim, my mother had 9 brothers, and my Uncle Jim was a great fisherman, a woodsman. And that very scene had been replicated in advance. I remember when he was dragging a boat out and putting me in it. And I sat down the very first day, and I wrote out in longhand on legal pads 25 pages in the form of letters, in epistolary form. Dear Maggie and Liza, my daughters, I'm going to tell you about the day Uncle Jim took me fishing. I'm in a study in the pre-Alps looking at a lake, and I saw something that reminded me of a story I wanted to tell. And that's how I started the book. And every day after breakfast, I went to that study, and with a fresh legal pad, wrote 20 or 25 more pages. And in 6 weeks, I'd written the whole book, the first draft. And it was all in the form of letters to my daughters so that they would know how beautiful my mother was. And so to me, it was the happiest time of my life. When I die, I want to go back to Bellagio and be walking up there and writing.
You just have to apply to the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yeah, just have to. I don't want to die, right? But I realized that I was painting a portrait of my mother, and through her, a time I called the sepia time in the life of America and Afro-America. A time that they will never know unless somebody of our generation records it for them. And that has motivated a lot of my work. I have a BA in history and a PhD, a master's degree in English literature. And I like telling stories. My father was a great storyteller. I'm like Elmer Fudd next to my father. My father's the funniest person I have ever met in my whole life. And I'm just trying to record these stories so that that beautiful aspect of African-American culture and that magical moment in the 50s of when so many things were changing, schools were becoming integrated like mine, and black people were emerging out of a kind of enforced isolation. Women were finally allowed to speak, were given a voice, given their proper place at places like Yale. When I went to Yale, they let in, the class of 66 at Yale had 6 black men to graduate. The class that entered with me in 69 had 96 black men and women, and 250 women in the freshman class. So affirmative action brought women into institutions of power and black people. That was a very amazing time in the history of America. It was a time when Republicans could be liberal. Jacob Javits, remember Jacob Javits? Remember Nelson Rockefeller? And what I found magical about the Academy was that you could say whatever you wanted, and as long as you could express yourself and back it up with some facts, nobody was going to demonize you. Nobody was going to mock you. Nobody was going to kick you out of the tribe for your ideological position. And that was so special to me that I've never left. I started first grade on the last day of August, 1956, and I'm 71 years old, and there's not been one day when I haven't been connected to a school. And I'm very proud of that. Anyway.
Amartya, this is not a fair question, but I'm not here to give fair questions. You have written so broadly.
Not a fair question.
You've written so broadly and so compellingly across so many different fields of economics and society. Is there a particular area that has captivated you the most, or do you just like to do it all?
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah, he should be. Sorry. Should be, because it's a difficult question. And after a very good meal, not easy to answer them. I think, economics wasn't my first interest. My main interest when I was young, very young, was Sanskrit and mathematics. And then it became physics. And for a while I did all those things. And then at some stage I decided that I had to go into economics, partly because I was getting interested in politics. And it seemed a little bit more interesting, for example, how to assess Mr. Modi's misrule in India. It's easier to know a bit of economics rather than cosmology. Though sometimes it occurred to me cosmology would not be such a bad way of understanding what's going on in India right now. But I found most branches of economics of very considerable interest. The one who, well, I would say a couple of them. When I was a student, Piero Saffa, who was an economist and a close friend of Italian Antonio Gramsci, he was one of my teachers. I found his ideas very interesting. But then I ran into and fell under the spell of Kenneth Arrow, who was doing mathematical economics, but of a kind that people hadn't really done before. And I remember thinking while talking with him that in one of his passages, Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, says that very few achievements in worldly novelty of thought has been done without the author having some exaggerated view of his own excellence.
How true.
So there was some thought on that, but then Ken Arrow was a good antidote to that. So I don't think he ever quite did that. But I think one of the important things is that if you wanted to pick a subject which was offering some real insight into the real world, and at the same time teaching you some techniques of analysis, understanding, I think it's not easy to read economics as a subject. I know that economics has a pretty bad name, and it's generally thought that, I remember a cartoon from the New Yorker, maybe 30 or maybe even more than that, maybe 40 years ago, which says nothing excepting two people sitting at a stool in a bar, and one telling the other, I'm an economist, ha ha. The fact that itself could be seen to be such a funny thing. Tells us something about the subject. So I think the perverse funniness of economics, yes, I think there's something in that. So I will have to go in that direction. But I have to tell you that, you know, when you were putting the question, I missed one or two words, and this is like walking difficulty. I mean, I have hearing problem too, and so I had to go when I was still in Trinity. I was master of Trinity then, and I went to this ear people, and they said, oh, they have fantastically accurate rendering. And so they kept on measuring me from different directions. And then I got those, and I went back to college, and I was extraordinarily happy. And in what they call high table, long table, where as a master you sit at one side and the other side. This machine was so extraordinarily well, I could hear everyone's conversation. And I began getting a little angry with myself that I was paying no attention to my guest, trying to eavesdrop the entire table's conversation. And I think I will have to get back, and I had not used that machine, but I have it somewhere. Hope that some stage I will be able to distinguish exactly the important things, like your guest conversation, rather than unimportant things, like some people 10 places down. What are they talking about? Though it can be fun.
Exactly. Well, this has been great. I think I would like to invite, oh yes.
I would just like to say that Amartya puts economics at the center of his heart, which is fine. It's up to him. But we in philosophy would like to say that his contributions to our field have been of extraordinary importance and significance. And perhaps more importantly, he's one of the people today who's most important in reminding us that economics is one of the moral sciences, and that you can't think about economics seriously without taking seriously the questions about justice and rights and the relationship between rights and the, that he has also written about.
It's true. And I'll tell you something nobody, well, only a couple people here know. His wife is his cousin.
This is true. I was going to say, and we all have Cambridge PhDs.
And we all have Cambridge PhDs, which is true.
And we've all taught at Harvard. There you are.
Yeah, there you go.
So 3 weird facts.
Well, so you see, that was my plan all along. Just get him up here and let the old friends chat. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, and the lights are a little bright up here, for which it is a little warm for the honorees, but maybe 1 or 2 questions, short questions that we could incite from the audience. Holly in the back is holding up a mic. You got maybe 1 or 2 things.
Can I get some water, please?
Yes. Can we get some water up here, too? Thank you.
So much. Is it working?
Yeah, no, it's working.
Thanks so much to all of you for these amazing reflections. Dr. Gates, you spoke about your mother. I'm wondering if part of what's extraordinary is that you are 3 incredible men who have done this work. And I'm just wondering if you could talk really both personally, but maybe from the perspective of your disciplines, about the importance of the women in your lives.
Well, I think I have. I mean, I wrote a book about, my favorite book is Colored People, and it was my first crossover book, really. It was a national bestseller, and and it's stories. I mean, as I said, I was raised with a master storyteller. But my mother wrote the obituaries for all the black people in the Potomac Valley. My mother, you died, you were black. They would call her name was Pauline Augusta Coleman Gates. My daughter's name Augusta, Maggie Maud Augusta. And Mama would write the obituary and then go to church. And then the minister would call in her, and she would stand up and read this obituary. And before I started school, I would go to church with her. I would walk, and I was so, but she put me in a little suit, and I was so proud just at how brilliantly she used language. My mother had a gift for being able to say, to name what you aspired to be, what was good about you, and not what the world and all the difficulties of the world had prevented you from becoming, had prevented you from realizing your aspirations. And my father sometimes, as I said, my father was so funny. He made Red Fox look like an undertaker. We were walking home one day from church, and my father said, "Pauline, you did a good job. You did a good job today." And she said, "Thank you, Gates." She called him Gates. And he said, at one point, I started to get up from the pew, go up, open up the casket to see if that son of a bitch was still dead inside That's what I was raised with, right? And that meant that what my mother was, that it was a Pulitzer Prize winning obituary. And she was the first black secretary of the PTA. And all the black people in our town would get dressed up in their Sunday best once a month and go and watch my mother stand up and read the minutes from the PTA. So I realized after Anthony and Wally did their intervention, then I'd grown up the son of a great storyteller, and my first model for a writer was my mother, writing those obituaries and standing up and reading them. And so it was inscribed in my DNA through my mother to become a writer through my environment. And so every day when I write, I don't write every day, but when I write, I'm trying to pay tribute to my father, but also to do justice to the resonance of my mother's voice. I'm very much a product of my mother, without a doubt. Oh, thanks.
Anthony?
Yes, please, thank you.
You get some perfect.
Marty, do you want to pick up that question?
Why don't you take it?
Okay. So I can't give you an adequate answer to that question, because if I think about my life, there's just lots and lots of women who have shaped me. Obviously, my mother too. My mother was a writer, and but at least as importantly, she was a reader, and she, whenever we came home for the vacations, she picked a book, a pile of books for me to read, and my mother, who decided in which order I would read George Eliot, D.H. Lawrence, Tolstoy, her favorite writers.
James Baldwin.
And yeah, I grew up in Kumasi in Ghana, but we had in our library, we had Richard Wright, who actually visited us when I was a child in Ghana, because he wrote a book about Ghana.
A bad book about Ghana.
Bad book about Ghana, which I have written about, pointing out how bad it is. But nevertheless, but he also wrote some good books which weren't about Ghana. They were in our library. Of course, Shoyinka's works were in our library. Chinua Achebe's works were in our library. And James Baldwin was Far Next Time was in our library. So yeah, we were. I mean, she shaped my reading very much as a child. And when I was in England, I lived with my grandmother, my English grandmother. My grandfather was dead, and she was an incredibly important person in my life because she She was unbelievably global in her interests. She was president of something called the Sino-British Fellowship Trust, which brought Chinese students to England from the 40s. And it still does so today, but it did through the whole, from the 40s until the end of my life. My grandmother was doing that because she had been to China in the 40s with my mother and met Mao and Chiang Kai-shek and all those people, because there was China was still divided between those two. So if you wanted to go to China at that point, it was ideal to meet both of them. So my grandmother was very important to me, in kind of shaping my sense of the place, of the world as a place. I remember sitting at breakfast with her one day, and she read out loud to me a letter that Indira Gandhi had written to her. Wow. So I think the sense of the world as a place that you should care about, and that it wasn't just the local places in England and in Ghana. A lot of that came from my grandmother, I think. I have 3 sisters who wouldn't want to be left out of this story, who have been enormously important to me and continue to be important to me in my life. And I just want to mention 2 philosophers. Dorothy Emmett, whom nobody in this room will know of, but well, you do. But she was a very important British philosopher of the late 20th century. And she had retired to Cambridge when I was a student, and I spent a lot of time talking to her. And it was she that connected me with African philosophy, because despite the fact that she was an English woman in her 70s, because she was great friends with Max Glucksmann, who was one of the great anthropologists in British anthropology, because they had been professors together at the University of Manchester, she had gotten interested in the intellectual life of Africa because Glucksmann, because she was interested in the philosophy of anthropology, and he was an Africanist. And so she got involved with the development of the philosophy department at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, for example. So when I was looking for people to talk to about how philosophy related to Africa, Dorothy was an enormously influential source of connections. And then when I came to Yale, this was Skip's idea, when I came to Yale as a graduate student, Cambridge, they said you can go, but you have to have a supervisor. And they said there's this woman called Ruth Marcus at Yale, and she should be your supervisor. And Ruth took that enormously seriously. She was my kind of mother in American philosophy. She was enormously intellectually generous to me, not to everybody, but to me. She looked after me. She sort of guided my way. It was because of her that after a great period of nobody getting tenure in the philosophy department at Yale, I got tenure in the philosophy department at Yale, I think. It's mostly her work to do that. So my career really was more than anything. I mean, I can't think of any, apart from my dissertation supervisor, who was a man, I can't think of 2 people who were more important at that stage of my career in philosophy than these 2 women to whom I owe a huge amount. So I could go on about other people, but the idea that, the idea of acknowledging the fact that intellectual life is, that it's not just a man's business. That's really something I've known since I was, a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe I will be inspired by my 2 predecessors. I think one of the striking things when I was growing up was how my life related to my parents and how they view each other. And there was a complexity in the sense that my father was a successful academic, and he did the kind of thing that we academics do. My mother was not quite in that line at all. He went to that progressive school, which I referred to earlier, started by Tagore, the poet. And so there was unusual things happening there. She was 100 years ago, she's dead now, 100 years ago, she was learning judo, because that was one of the things that was taught. And she was, in those days, unusual in being on the stage as a woman. That was regarded as a terrible thing to do. And that actually made the progeny like me possible, because my father was particularly impressed by that and used to carry pictures of my mother from the stage performance. But while there's a kind of, I became aware of an odd complexity that could arise, where you could be praised highly, as my mother was, for being a very successful dancer, and at the same time, quite often vilified for doing what she was doing, namely being on the stage. And that was a hugely discussed subject at that time, as I would say, about 100 years ago. And there's an interesting story I recollect from the City College in Calcutta, not to be confused with the City College here. City College in Calcutta had a well-known academic as its principal called Hiram Bomoito. He was both a great academic, but also a great believer in the tradition, so that very opposed to women being on the stage. And the story is that he was walking one day past what was Menoka Theatre, which is a well-known theatre. I've often been there recently. It continues. There's nothing evil or extraordinary about it. Normal theatre where women actually played the part of women, as we know that it was unusual in Shakespeare's time too. So it remained a standard theatre. And in passing, I have to say, I was very impressed that Mahatma Gandhi, when he came back from South Africa to India, in those days, the dominant force was Calcutta, so he took a boat from Cape Town to Calcutta, and then he went to Ahmedabad from there by train. And when he landed, Gandhi's grandson, Gopal Gandhi, and I had both spent some time on the subject as to what did Gandhi do when he was there for 5-6 days. It turns out that he went to plays 4 or 5 times, including in the Menoka Theatre that we were referring to. So it's really blessed by, obviously, acceptance. But when Hiram Bomoito was passing, the young boy came up and he said, "Sir, could you tell me where the Menoka Theatre is?" And he was very upset by this deplorable taste of this young boy. And he said, "I just don't know." But after walking for a few minutes, it occurred to him he had just lied, because he did know where Menoka Theatre was. So being again a moralist, he had to correct that. So he went around running, trying to get hold of his boy, and eventually found him and caught up with him, held him by his shoulder, turned him around, and say, "I know very well, but I will not tell you." And so what of our life consists of that too, when I think about, even American politics, there's a lot of that we have to know. And of course, I won't even start on Indian politics, given the state where it is now. Thank you.
Marvelous.
Well, I think it's time now for me to give our honorees their medals. They've been patient and they have entertained and enlightened us remarkably. I would like to read something briefly. It's an excerpt from the preamble to this organization's constitution, which motivates our recognition of these wonderful individuals. And I quote, "The American Commonwealth's highest expressions of public worth are the notable achievements that extraordinary individuals make in service to all sectors of society. Those whose public contributions make possible significant strides in sustaining and advancing society are role models for future generations, just as they have been inspired by extraordinary service by those who came before them. Celebrating the worth of noble accomplishment, honoring the leadership of the imagination and skill that illumines our lives and advances the social sciences broadly, and recognizing high service to humanity are solemn responsibilities that the Congress of the United States of America, by its acts adopted in 1898 and 1925, has entrusted to the care of the National Institute of Social Sciences." Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like now to award our gold medals to our honorees. Professor Sen, I will start with you first. You may sit if you wish. No? All right. Remarkable. Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Let's do this here. Thank you. Don't open it yet. Let's see. Here we go. Perfect.
Oh, great.
You're absolutely welcome. And let me see. Whoops. I will, yes, why don't you hold on to that for now? Always a trick. There we are. Professor. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You take that away. There we are. And Professor Gates. There you are, sir. Thank you. Whoop. Thank you.
Very handsome.
May we give them all a big round of applause as they make their way to their seats.
Thank you.